Hi, I'm Denshi. As you can tell by the scary thumbnail and the subject matter of this video, this is a Denshi Halloween special about things that scare me about Linux, my Linux fears, and there's even a little ghost and a spooky vampire tux over there to set the mood. Except things in this video aren't really, just irrational fear, things like ghosts and such. These are real issues and real genuine fears and concerns, and this video is more sad than scary really. But anyway, let's get into my first big fear in GNU Linux, and that's Snap and Flatpak. So you don't know what these are. They're essentially sandboxed package management systems that are supposed to be quote-unquote universal. Like basically you would use these to install programs on most distributions who support them. And the idea is you can install Snap on Arch Linux and on Ubuntu and on SUSE or whatever, and it will install all your packages in sandboxed form. And the same thing goes for Flatpak. They're really slow. That's my first thing that upsets me. They're super slow, and this is all because they are sandboxed and they don't do things like adapt to your GTK theme or whatever, because you're installing them in a sandbox so they can have their own libraries, and that obviously occupies a lot of space. The fear here is that new users find them quote-unquote useful. I remember installing a couple of snaps when I began using Ubuntu. That's probably one of the first things that I really regretted about Linux, is snaps are so confusing to deal with, which is ironic because new users are pushed towards them. And Snap is controlled by Canonical, so Snap specifically. Flatpak is just an open standard. Snap, the Snap store, that's all under Canonical. Another thing that I'm super scared of is proprietary software creeping in. We've seen so much stuff go over to Linux, or get Linux ports. Obviously there's Zoom, something like Microsoft Teams and Edge, and I'll talk more about the Microsoft stuff later. And all this proprietary software stops people from trying FOSS, and that's what's really sad about it, is that even let's say, I don't know, Adobe moves over their suite, that will get a lot of people to use Linux, but that sort of defeats the whole point of GNU and stuff being a free operating system and having all that freedom, because now you're just going to use it to run proprietary software, and chances are the proprietary software isn't going to run so good on Linux regardless. And the worst thing is that alternatives are crushed. So if, imagine, I don't know, Photoshop magically gets ported to Linux, who's going to use GIMP then? And it's not incentivizing freedom, so that's really what upsets me the most. I guess this video is more about things that upset me than scare me, but these are fears. And the next one really is a really big fear of mine. It's elitism and bad documentation, because this is a little bit of an issue that's more in the control of the average user. So a lot of cool tools are out there for GNU Linux, whether it be programs or whatever, normally hosted on GitHub or whatever, like scripts and dot files and stuff. And they can be confusing for new users though, because people, make these tools and forget to leave proper instructions. This for me has been a big issue when it comes to just the smallest kind of stuff. But I don't know, it puts me a bit off, because I'm like, oh, well, that was there was the solution to an issue and it was super clear. I don't know, I had to install this to get this piece of software running, and nobody ever told me. So the issue isn't complex or hard to use software, the issue is having proper documentation. So I'm not saying that software like DWM or something should magically become easy to use, or the GUI customizing interface or whatever. No, it's good to have software that's super quote-unquote elite, like DWM or whatever. What's bad is when you have software like that and you have bad documentation, and especially a lot of new projects and stuff, I see very poor documentation. That's a bit of a fear. Now this next one, however, dwarfs that. Microsoft doing what it does. This is my ultimate fear when it comes to Linux. There's WSL and WSL2, so for the uninitiated, lucky few who don't know, that's Windows Subsystem for Linux, which ironically is actually a Linux subsystem for Windows. The name is super misleading because that's how Microsoft just does things. WSL and WSL2, so that's the new one that came out, are not replacement for desktop Linux. It's just a thing where you can run Linux as, I think it's on a layer close enough to virtualization, but not really on your Windows machine. However, new users will use WSL like that. I know a couple of people who are like, I use Linux, and they don't. They just use WSL on the Windows machine. And sure, they might be, learning how to use GNU Linux there, but none of them end up switching over to desktop Linux. So could Microsoft be adapting the Linux kernel? That's something that I think it's Eric S. Raymond published a blog post about. He talked about how Microsoft could be adapting Linux for Windows eventually. That might happen as a kernel. I don't think it's gonna happen anytime soon. But if it does happen, that gives Linux, quote-unquote, more market share, and they sort of defeat it, which brings me on to the last thing. The triple E tactic is at play once again. So Microsoft with WSL2 claims to be loving Linux and open source and stuff, which obviously isn't true. And they've been doing stuff, I think it was DirectX Things, or translation layer, is available exclusively for WSL, so it's completely useless, but they made that available. So I think what's gonna happen is they're gonna extend a bunch of Linux stuff, make it proprietary Microsoft stuff, and then kill kill regular Linux. Obviously, that's going to take a long time, and it's not going to happen without any kind of fight, but, you know, it could happen. And the hints are here. Something like Microsoft Edge, like Windows Defender getting moved to Linux, and Teams and stuff. Well, Defender is still on its way, but Edge and Teams are already released for Linux. So, yeah, the fear is already there. But anyway, my biggest fear, I guess, is a proprietary and controlled takeover of Linux. That's sort of what I've been expressing in this video. I don't want proprietary software to be like the norm on Linux, as is happening because of Snap and Flatpak and because of other things and bad things that are happening because Microsoft is acting this way or Canonical is acting this way or whatever. So to prevent this from affecting me, I've been looking to alternatives. That's right! Is it really possible to use OpenBSD as a daily driver? I genuinely have no idea because I've never tried out OpenBSD. Goodbye.